the 1st. And you can help when you won't even have to leave your neighborhood. Volunteers go door to door in their own community to pass out information on breast cancer and to collect donations. Join me in this effort to raise over $500,000 for the American Cancer Society. So become a volunteer or support the volunteer in your neighborhood. Call 771-3841 from TV8.
It's Monday, April 25th. 10 years ago today, the 28-year-old son of the late Senator Robert F. Kennedy was found dead in a Palm Beach, Florida hotel room. The cause of death, an apparent drug overdose. It was the top story on the CBS Evening News.
Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Yet again tonight, the private, personal tragedy of the Kennedy family becomes a public one. David Kennedy was found dead today in a Palm Beach, Florida hotel room, alone. Cause of death still unannounced. Since the death of his father, Robert Kennedy, by assassination in 1968, David Kennedy had a history of problems: drug abuse, alcohol abuse. David Kennedy was 28 years old. Charles Osgood has more on the death of a young man who had everything, but not enough.
The body of David Kennedy was found this morning by an employee of the Brazilian Court Hotel in Palm Beach, in room 107. He had checked in there on Friday.
There is no signs of foul play. The investigation is continuing.
David Anthony Kennedy was born 28 years ago into America's most celebrated family. He was the fourth of the 11 children born to Robert F. Kennedy and his wife Ethel. Members of the Kennedy family gathered today at Hickory Hill, the Robert Kennedy estate in McLean, Virginia, to console each other and console Ethel, David's mother, and to pray. Once it seemed the Kennedy clan was blessed beyond measure. They had wealth, Patriarch Joe Kennedy's millions, Kennedy looks, Kennedy charm, and drive, and most of all, they had each other. Little David Kennedy used to play in those famous games at Hyannisport. But tragedy was not long in coming. David was 8 years old when his Uncle John, the president, was assassinated in Dallas. He was 12 years old when his father, Senator Robert Kennedy, who was running for president, was shot to death in Los Angeles. David was watching television and saw what happened. David Kennedy's death today at 28 is but the latest event in a story that fits the dictionary definition of tragedy. An intensely sad, calamitous, or fatal event, or course of events. Charles Osgood, CBS News, New York.
And on this day in 1983, an unusual letter from Red Square arrived in the United States. Little Samantha Smith of Manchester, Maine, was invited to visit Moscow by Soviet leader Yuri Andropov. Samantha had written the Soviet president expressing her fears of nuclear war. She would soon travel to Moscow to meet Andropov face to face.
And that is the news for this half hour. Thanks for watching.
This is CBS News, up to the minute.
This is CBS.
Ahead on CBS News, up to the minute, violence erupts in Johannesburg as South Africa prepares for its first all-race elections.
And U.S. peacekeepers evacuate the wounded from Gorazda as Bosnian Serbs yield to a NATO threat.
Good morning. This is CBS News, up to the minute. I'm Troy Roberts.
And I'm Cheryl Atkinson. Thank you for joining us. An act of terrorism has marred the last day of the campaigning for president in South Africa. 9 people were killed when a car bomb exploded yesterday in Johannesburg. Maggie Sterner has the story.
Johannesburg police say without any doubt it was the biggest bomb that has ever gone off in this city. Police estimate there were about 200 pounds of explosives inside the car. It was parked on a downtown street near 2 offices of the African National Congress. Windows were shattered for several blocks. Cars were destroyed. Some shop owners lost everything. This is also a residential area.
Making breakfast, all of a sudden I had a big bang. My baby was in the room, lucky nothing happened. Why did they do this? I had a blast, you know. The windows were just shattered, my bedroom walls, everything was just being shattered everywhere, you know.
ANC officials say they were the target of the blast.
And the attack was clearly aimed at the African National Congress to hit at our nerve center, and we are sure that it was meant to injure and kill
One ANC candidate was killed in the explosion. ANC President Nelson Mandela called for restraint from party members.
Nothing they can do which will stop us from making the 27th of April the historic day in this country.
Zulu Chief Minister Mangosuthu Buthelezi was holding his party's last rally in Soweto.
And one can only hope and pray that that is an isolated incident and that we are not going to see an escalation of that kind of violence.
No one has claimed responsibility for the attack. ANC officials blame right-wing extremists who are boycotting the election. The group has denied they were involved. Election organizers say the bombing could disrupt the polling. Voting starts on Tuesday. Officials are hoping people aren't frightened away from the polls and praying there are no more acts of terrorism. Maggie Sterner for CBS News, Johannesburg.
Another bomb exploded at a polling place in northern Transvaal this morning. No injuries have been reported in that blast.
In El Salvador, voters have picked their first president since the country's civil war ended 2 years ago. Conservative presidential candidate Armando Calderón Sol easily beat his leftist competition. Voter turnout was described as light. The president-elect takes office June 1st. An effort to end the bloodshed in Rwanda has failed. Government representatives reportedly did not show up for the peace talks, and rebel leaders left the meeting that was to be held in Tanzania. Heavy fighting was reported in Kigali, and an international relief group says it's pulling out of the Central African nation. Doctors Without Borders say about 170 patients and hospital staff were killed yesterday in southern Rwanda. In neighboring Burundi, some army forces reportedly attempted a coup this morning. Belgian radio says the attempt was quelled and some troops have already been arrested.
Bosnian Serbs have backed down, and the town of Gorazde is getting some much-needed help. UN troops evacuated dozens of wounded yesterday, and aid convoys are making food deliveries for the first time since the Serb offensive began about 3 weeks ago. The wounded were brought to a sports stadium in Sarajevo and taken to local hospitals. The Serbs pulled back from Gorazde after NATO issued an ultimatum on Friday, but there are reports they burned houses and blew up a water treatment plant as they retreated. The Bosnian Serbs face another deadline on Wednesday. They've been told to pull back about 12 more miles from Gorazde. The UN says it thinks they will comply. While the latest Bosnian hotspot is apparently in a cooling off period, many are wondering how long it will last. CBS News correspondent Bob Orr with that story.
Cautioning that we've been disappointed before, Secretary of State Warren Christopher found some hope in the Bosnian Serbs' pullout from Gorazde.
It appears that the NATO ultimatum is working. Of course, we're monitoring the situation very carefully.
While the threat of airstrikes remains, criticism continues that the administration has been too soft on Serb aggression.
Serbia that invaded its neighbor and commenced genocidal practices of a criminal nature.
Leaders in both parties today said the West should consider expanding military operations by bombing Serbia. And they blasted a command structure that gives the United Nations veto power over NATO airstrikes.
If the United States is going to be involved, we should be involved through NATO. And we should frankly, politely but firmly ask the United Nations to step aside and allow NATO to be the lead agency.
The UN refused a NATO request for air raids as Serbia